Plymouth, Massachusetts, a small town with a big history nestled on the coast of New England. This quaint town is known for its picturesque harbor and charming town center, but it holds a much deeper significance in American history. It's the place where the Pilgrims, a group of English settlers, first landed in 1620. These settlers were not just any group of people. They were a determined and devout group seeking a new beginning. They left behind their homeland in search of religious freedom and the opportunity to build a community based on their beliefs. The Pilgrims' journey was arduous and fraught with challenges. They sailed across the vast Atlantic Ocean on a ship called the Mayflower, a vessel that was not originally intended for passenger travel. The journey took over 2 months, and the conditions on board were cramped and harsh. Despite the difficulties, the Pilgrims remained steadfast in their mission. The Mayflower finally reached the shores of what is now Plymouth, Massachusetts, in November of 1620. The sight of land brought a mix of relief and trepidation. They had arrived in a new world, but it was a world that was completely unfamiliar to them. The Pilgrims were searching for religious freedom and a new life. They sought to establish a community where they could practice their faith without persecution. This quest for freedom and self-determination is a cornerstone of the American spirit, and it began with these early settlers. The land they found was unfamiliar and wild. The dense forests and rugged coastline presented both opportunities and challenges. The Pilgrims had to learn to navigate this new environment, relying on their resourcefulness and determination to survive. The Pilgrims were greeted by a vast wilderness, dense forests, rolling hills, and a coastline teeming with life. The natural beauty of the area was striking, but it also meant that the Pilgrims had to adapt quickly to their new surroundings. The coastline was rich with marine life, providing a vital source of food for the settlers. The Pilgrims learned to fish and gather shellfish, skills that were essential for their survival in those early days. This was the land they would call home. Over time, the Pilgrims built a settlement that would become the foundation of Plymouth Colony. They established homes, farms, and a community that reflected their values and aspirations. The story of the Pilgrims is a testament to the resilience and determination of those who seek a better life, and it all began here in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Imagine sailing for months in a small, crowded ship. The Mayflower was not a large vessel, and it was packed with over 100 passengers, all seeking a new life across the ocean. The conditions were far from comfortable. The passengers had to endure tight quarters with little privacy and limited space to move around. The air was often stale, and the smell of the sea mixed with the scent of unwashed bodies and the limited food supplies they had brought with them. That's what the Pilgrims did. They left behind their homes, their friends, and everything they knew, driven by the hope of finding religious freedom and a better life in the New World. The journey was long and arduous, stretching over 2 months on the open sea. The Pilgrims had to rely on their faith and determination to keep their spirits up during the seemingly endless days and nights. They faced storms, illness, and hunger on their journey. The Atlantic Ocean was unforgiving, with violent storms that tossed the Mayflower like a toy in a bathtub. The ship creaked and groaned under the strain, and the passengers clung to whatever they could to avoid being thrown about. Seasickness was rampant, adding to the misery of the voyage. The food supplies dwindled and fresh water became scarce, leading to dehydration and malnutrition. Many people got sick during the long voyage. Some didn't survive. The cramped conditions and lack of proper sanitation made it easy for diseases to spread. The Pilgrims had to care for their sick companions as best as they could, but without proper medical supplies, there was little they could do. The loss of life was a heavy burden on the survivors, who had to continue on despite their grief and exhaustion. The Pilgrims were exhausted when they finally arrived in Plymouth. After months at sea, they were weak and weary, but their journey was far from over. They had reached the New World, but now they faced the daunting task of building a new life from scratch. The land was unfamiliar and the weather harsh, but they were determined to make it their home. Life in the New World was hard. The Pilgrims had to quickly learn how to survive in an environment that was vastly different from what they had known. They had to contend with the elements, wild animals, and the challenge of growing food in a new and often unforgiving landscape. The first winter was particularly brutal, with many pilgrims succumbing to the cold and lack of adequate shelter. The Pilgrims had to build homes, find food, and establish a community. They worked tirelessly, cutting down trees to build shelters, and learning to hunt and fish to supplement their meager food supplies. They also had to establish relationships with the Native American tribes, who were initially wary of the newcomers, but eventually provided crucial assistance in the form of food and knowledge about the land, and survived the harsh winter. The cold was relentless, and many pilgrims were not prepared for the severity of the New England winter. They had to huddle together for warmth and ration their food carefully to make it through the long, dark months. The experience tested their resolve and their faith, but it also brought them closer together as a community. They were not prepared for the challenges ahead. Despite their best efforts, the Pilgrims faced numerous setbacks and hardships. But through their perseverance and the help of their new Native American allies, they managed to survive and eventually thrive in their new home. Their journey and struggle laid the foundation for what would become a new nation, built on the principles of freedom and determination. The Pilgrims were not alone in this new land. Native Americans, the Wampanoag tribe, had lived there for centuries. At first there was fear and suspicion between the two groups. They spoke different languages and had different ways of life. A Wampanoag man named Squanto spoke English. He had learned it from English traders. Squanto became a bridge between the Pilgrims and his people. After a difficult first year, the Pilgrims had a successful harvest. They were thankful for the food and the help of the Wampanoag. To celebrate, they held a feast. The Wampanoag joined them. For 3 days they ate, played games, and shared stories. This event became known as the First Thanksgiving. It was a time of peace and gratitude. Beyond the Thanksgiving myth, a complex relationship. The story of the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag is often simplified into a tale of friendship and cooperation. However, the reality is far more nuanced and complex. The first Thanksgiving is often portrayed as a harmonious gathering, a moment where two cultures came together to share a meal and give thanks. But this image is just a small part of a much larger and more intricate story. The relationship between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag was complicated. While there were moments of cooperation and mutual benefit, there were also tensions and misunderstandings. The Pilgrims were newcomers in a land that was already inhabited, and their arrival brought significant changes. The Wampanoag helped the Pilgrims survive. They shared their knowledge of the land, teaching the Pilgrims essential survival skills. Without this assistance, the Pilgrims might not have made it through their first harsh winter. They taught them how to plant crops. The Wampanoag introduced the Pilgrims to native plants like corn, beans, and squash, which became staples in their diet. These agricultural techniques were crucial for the Pilgrims' survival and success in the New World. They taught them how to fish in the rivers. The Wampanoag showed the Pilgrims the best fishing spots and methods, providing another vital source of food. This knowledge was invaluable, especially during the early years of the settlement. However, the Pilgrims also brought diseases from Europe. These diseases, such as smallpox and influenza, were new to the Native Americans and had devastating effects. These diseases were deadly to the Native Americans. Many Wampanoag died. The impact of these diseases cannot be overstated. They decimated entire communities and significantly altered the balance of power in the region. The arrival of the Pilgrims marked the beginning of a period of profound change and upheaval for the Wampanoag and other Native American tribes. This complex relationship, marked by both cooperation and conflict, shaped the early history of what would become the United States. The Wampanoag perspective, a time of mourning. The arrival of the Pilgrims marked a turning point for the Wampanoag. Their way of life would never be the same. They had lived in balance with nature for generations. The Pilgrims brought change, and with it, loss. Today the Wampanoag remember this history. They honor their ancestors and keep their traditions alive. Thanksgiving traditions from Plymouth to the present. Over time, the story of the first Thanksgiving became an important part of American culture. Families and friends gather to share a meal and give thanks. We remember the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag. Thanksgiving is a time for reflection. We think about what we are grateful for in our own lives. The enduring legacy of the first Thanksgiving. The story of the first Thanksgiving reminds us of the importance of gratitude, cooperation, and respect for different cultures. It is a story that continues to resonate with people today. It is a reminder of our shared history, both the good and the bad. As we gather with loved ones, let us remember the true meaning of Thanksgiving.